We're very pleased to welcome someone who I don't think is going to need much of an introduction from me, because I think that his either face or name will be familiar to you all. It's Ziauddin Sardar, who's very kindly come up all the way from London this evening to speak to us. I don't think he needs an introduction, but I'll say a few words that he has been acknowledged and certainly is a genuine polymath in the Renaissance tradition insofar as his writing and work stretches from, for example, Muslim thinkers from the 10th century right up to contemporary European issues concerning Muslims today in 2009. His work spans many different disciplines, and if you need any sort of further information about how to refer further to his bibliography, for example, he's got a very useful website you can refer to. So without taking up any further time this evening, what we're going to do is that Ziauddin Sardar is going to speak for about 40-45 minutes, and then he very kindly agreed to give us a fair amount of time for questions and discussion. So after that, we'll devote about 15-20 minutes to any questions that you may have. Okay? So please welcome our speaker this evening.
Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming out this evening, especially given the kind of weather that we are having. I mean, we tend to have lots of weather in Britain, but whenever we have any real weather, it seems to become a major problem. But anyway, thank you very much for coming tonight. My talk, or the subject that I was given to talk about, was Islam, public space, and British Muslim. Now, all these three terms, Islam, public space, and British Muslims, are somewhat problematic for me. And what I thought I'll do is to talk about the problems I have with these terms and see where we go from there. Let me start with the word or the term Islam. Now, Islam, as probably most of you know, means peace and submission. But if you look at the Muslim world in 2009, peace and submission, harmony, the things that the word Islam actually means are conspicuous largely by their absence. And that's the source of problem for me. In most places where Islam is predominant, one sees stagnation and decay, yet I associate the word Islam with progress and development. In most places where Islam is dominant, one sees authoritarianism and despotism, yet for Islam, for me, Islam means something very open and dynamic. In a sense, if Islam has any significance for me, and if Islam has any significance for vast majority of believers, then it must be something more than simply a belief system. Because if I simply believe something, and that belief or that system of truth doesn't actually affect my behavior in a sense, or doesn't change me, or doesn't change my society, then that belief simply becomes an abstract belief. It doesn't actually do anything. In a sense, Islam for me, more than anything else, is a system of moral and ethical guidance, that without providing certain sort of moral and ethical guidance, without seeing that moral and ethics in action, both in personal lives and in social lives and in society as a whole, I think Islam has no real meaning, or indeed any religion has no real meaning. At the end of the day, the function of a religion is to provide social and ethical guidance. Now, the thing about ethics is that it is contextual. Ethics has no meaning outside a particular context. Moreover, it's not just that ethics should have meaning in context, but if you see ethical behavior in action, then you ought to be able to draw certain universal principles from it. In other words, if you see certain Islamic moral and ethical principles in action, you should be able to draw from them the conclusion that this is what Islam teaches about ethics and morality. So in a sense, what we see on the ground bears very little relationship to what I regard what Islam is and should really be all about. Now, if you look at the Muslim world, we see many kinds of Islams. There's not just one Islam, but there are many kinds of Islam. Islam is not a monolithic entity, if you like. There's Shia and Sunnis, there's Sufis, there are 4 schools of thought. Even in Britain, you see a whole diversity of different kind of belief systems, different kind of people claiming to be Muslims and claiming to follow Islam. But the point is that all these different varieties, despite all their differences, have certain thing in common. And I think it is that thing that they have in common that becomes a bit problematic, a bit of a source of concern. For example, they all have a very specific notion of what Sharia is or what Islamic law is. And that, for me, is slightly problematic. Because what I find that many people define as Sharia, I do not really see that being reflected as, if you like, the ethical principles of Islam. For me, as a Muslim, it is given that there is no compulsion in religion. This is a verse from the Quran. That you are free to believe. The very word, there is no compulsion in religion, means you are free to believe what you want to believe. Not just you are free to believe what you want to believe, but in fact you are free to change your belief. Because if there is no compulsion, I can do as I wish. But the Sharia says that apostasy cannot be tolerated. But in fact, not just it cannot be tolerated, but the apostate should be killed. Now, to me, that is a fundamental difference between what I think Islam teaches me and how I see vast majority of people who hold on to certain absolute things like the Sharia supposed to mean in society. Now, even the people who shaped the Sharia, the way Islamic law was constructed and developed during the Abbasid period in the 8th and 9th century, those people were also aware that in fact ethics and morality have a context, that Islam has certain context. And in fact, a great deal of the Sharia, as we understand it today, is very contextual. And the context that it represents is the context of the period that it was developed and shaped and codified in, namely the 8th, 9th century Abbasid Caliphate period. Well, in that period, everybody was a Muslim by definition. And in fact, to denounce your Islam was not so much a denunciation of a religion, but actually a denunciation of a state, of a particular, or standing up to a particular empire. So it was treason that you were, it was a statement of treason you were making rather than a statement of rejection of religion. And it was the state that took revenge against you, and hence the death penalty for that is directly related to the Muslim empire and how the empire related to individual and belief system. So the context of how the Sharia developed is the context of that particular period. And of course, there are lots of other elements of Sharia, how the Sharia looks at women, how the Sharia looks at the notion of adultery or zina, how the Sharia looks at the way the world is divided into Dar al-Harb and Dar al-Islam, meaning the land of peace and the land of war, or land of belief and land of disbelief, or whatever you like. The whole panoply of the whole totality of the Sharia the way it is, its context is the context of the Abbasid period, the context of the 8th or 9th century. And if that is the case, then of course that Sharia would have no meaning for 21st century because it doesn't have any relevance to contemporary time. And that's one of my, if you like, first particular concern about Islam, that I think our understanding of Islam has been frozen in history. That essentially what we need to do is to understand Islam from epoch to epoch. If all we have to understand Islam is a text, then the only relationship we can have with the text is the relationship of interpretation. And interpretation has to involve the context of the time that you are interpreting in. And if the interpretations of the Quran that we have are all interpretations of 8th and 9th and 10th and 11th century, and these are the only interpretations that exist today, then there is clearly a problem that Islam, to my way of thinking, has not developed and has not changed as it should do. And therefore our understanding of Islam is essentially 8th, 9th century understanding of Islam. We don't really know what Islam means in contemporary times because we have not bothered to go out and discover. And this is why when we look at certain countries where Islam is predominant, those countries reflect the society in which the original understanding of the Quran was first developed. Look at Saudi Arabia, right? Despite all the shopping malls and all that. Look at the social relations. Look at indeed how in Saudi Arabia labor is treated, foreign labor is treated. The relationship between foreign labor and the Saudis is very much kind of master and slave. Look at the way women are treated in Saudi Arabia. Not just that they have to wear a hijab, but they have to wear a black hijab by law, by Sharia law. The black, of course, as you know, observes the maximum possible heat. So the men wear white, so they are as cool as can be, and women have to wear black, cover themselves in black, so the maximum possible heat, is absorbed in their body. There is certain kind of misogyny here, which is very deeply structured in society as well. Or look at Iran and look at Taliban. I mean, I don't have to give you an example. There is something profoundly wrong, I think, about our understanding of Islam. And unless we appreciate that, I think we are not going to develop the kind of progressive, dynamic understanding of Islam that I seek. So that's the first one, Islam. The second word is public space. Now I have a problem with the word public space as well, because public space in Britain has a very specific meaning. It means a space which is essentially reserved for secularist thought. In Britain, we do not accept that religion has a role to play in public space. And God forbid anybody who mentions the name of God in public space. So even if the Archbishop mentions something like the Sharia, forget what people may or may not think of the Sharia. He's criticized simply for raising the question that a religious law could possibly be discussed in a public space. In Britain, we just do not have any space in the public space to discuss religion or issues of religion. Now that to me is a profoundly unjust position. If somebody from a secularist background can stand up and say whatever they think, then why cannot somebody from a religious background can stand up and say whatever they think? Why is it that, for example, that our former Prime Minister, Tony Blair, had to hide his Christian beliefs while he was in office? We don't do God was a very famous statement that when he came out of the office, then he suddenly became, a very pious Catholic Christian. But when he was in the office, his Christianity had to be suppressed. The reason for that is simple, that in contemporary Britain, in contemporary secular society, we associate religion with irrationality. Anybody who spouts religion, by definition, is speaking irrational nonsense. And if you want to speak irrational nonsense, you are free to do so in a private space, but do not engage, do not bring in your religion in public space. Now, in fact, for me, this is a kind of double whammy. Not just that you cannot bring religion into public space, but many issues of public space are issues of ethics and morality. And for me, the basic guidance, the basic ethics and morality comes from religion. So I am being asked not simply not to bring my religion to public space, but all those issues of ethics and morality, I am asked to suppress, to be neutral about them, and not to say anything that is based on my religious understanding about such issues. For example, what it means to be human, what is death, is suicide allowed? Can you have, so many issues in public that you just, switch on the television and the news, and so many issues come along. They're all essentially issues of ethics and morality. So this total absence of religion from public space, I think, has meant two things. One is that if you have dogmatic secularism on one side, which says no religion under any circumstances in public space, then you're going to have an action and reaction, the Newton's third law on the other side, that you're going to have fundamentalist religion insisting on coming on in public space. So essentially, the kind of rise of fundamentalism we see today, I see that as part and parcel of a project which insists in shutting religion up. Not just shutting religion up, but in fact shunting it away from public space, in a sense. You notice the kind of fundamentalism we see today. It's very modern phenomena. It has only come to the scene 20, 30, 40 years from now. It didn't exist in the form. Fanaticism has always existed, but the kind of fundamentalism we see today that is associated with state and shouting in public space is a very specific phenomenon of 20 and 30 years. So that's the first consequence. And I think the second consequence is that if you really do remove God from public space, then you create a God-shaped hole in society. And the fact that there is a God-shaped hole in society is pretty evident. I mean, just look at the current economic recession and crisis. The kind of an economy based on absolute and utter greed. Famous quote from Gecko in Wall Street: "Greed is good." Where there's no notion of accountability of any kind. I think it's the consequences of a society which has a very major God-shaped hole in it. And also lots of social ills, not just binge drinking, but knife crimes and fragmentation of family. And there's been a report out on childhood yesterday, which is any kind of understanding of childhood has to be a critique of adulthood. And so this report is basically criticizing adults rather than saying anything about children, and it's basically saying that adults are selfish. And that's a very major part of this report, that is selfish adults who have let the children down, and that's why the children are the way they are. You can just read various newspapers. Today's newspapers have some comments on this report which came out yesterday. So I think the absence of God from public space has created a serious kind of crisis of morality and ethics. So there are two consequences of that. Now, as a religious person, I think it is not just unfair and unequal that I should not be allowed to participate in public space on the basis of my religion without shame. in fact, with pride. But I also think it is my duty to actually do that. That in any society, there has to be level playing field for all segments of society. And everybody has a right to participate in public space equally, with in a fair and equitable way. And therefore, I think that as a religious person, I should also make constant intervention in public space based on my understanding of Islam, about religion and ethics. But more than that, I think that this is a duty of all Muslims, that Muslims in general should actually make interventions in public space and try and reclaim public space for themselves, just as other groups, particularly the secularists and the humanists and so on and so forth, have tried to reclaim, or, if you like, carve out spaces, in public space to let their feelings, their comments, their aspirations, their critique known. I think it's a duty for Muslims to actually do that. And I say that on the basis of the following, that I believe that Islam, in a sense, is all about social justice. I mean, Ibn Taymiyyah, perhaps one of the most austere of all Muslim thinkers, who was responsible for Salafi and Wahhabi thinking that we find today. One of the most interesting things he said was that I'd rather live in a state that is just and not Islamic than in a state that is Islamic and unjust. So what he was saying, that in fact Islam demands justice. And if Islam demands justice, then it demands political action, because justice is never given, it is always taken. Like power, you have to go out and fight for justice. Power is never given, power is always taken. And justice never materializes out of nothing. You always have to work for justice. And if Islam is all about justice, then it is essential for Muslims to be politically engaged. That means they have to participate, not just in the political process, but also have a presence in public space as well. Now, that means that as a Muslim who has a problem with Islam, as I have defined, I expect a group of people called British Muslims to be politically engaged in contemporary Britain, to carve out a special niche for themselves in public space, and to fight for issues of social justice and issues of ethics and morality. However, I have a problem with not just the word British Muslims, but also what the words actually imply. Because if British Muslims are a microcosm of the Muslims around the world, then many problems that I see associated with Islam around the world can be reflected amongst British Muslims as well. And if I'm using the label British Muslims, then it is reasonable for you to ask, what is so British about these Muslims? How do these British Muslims differ from Saudi Muslims, or Pakistani Muslims, or Indonesian Muslims? And I think here we do need to reflect on the fact that if Muslims live in Britain, then they have certain responsibility towards Britain. And that responsibility, if you like, defines their Britishness. And I think one of the first responsibility is the responsibility towards British history, or say European history. Now the problem with British history or European history as it is taught today, that if you just read British history as it exists in textbooks in secondary school or university. Now you're going to get, First World War and Hitler and Second World War and all the kings from Tudors and onwards. That as it exists, that history doesn't really reflect, say, for example, my presence or the presence of my religion or my culture or my civilization in Britain. So it's a bit problematic. However, there is a component of European history which in fact is to a very large extent also the history of Islam. And that, of course, is the history of Muslim Spain for 800 years. And that particular history has a very strong significance, I think, for British Muslims. Because it is that particular history, the history of multiculturalism in Spain, the kind of thought and learning produced by philosophers like Ibn Rushd, one of the great rationalists who ever lived, or philosophers like Ibn Tufayl, who wrote the first philosophical novel and defended evolution. I think that history is not just only history of Islam, but it's also history of Europe, which means it is also history of Britain. And it is that history that actually defined the Enlightenment and defined and was responsible for the emergence of Renaissance. Renaissance in Europe could not have happened without Islamic thought and learning. If there was no Ibn Sina, if there was no Ibn Rushd, if there was no Ibn Tufayl, if there was no Ibn Haytham, something that Dr. Malik, a scientist that Dr. Malik studies, if there was no Ibn Haytham, there would have been no Newton, no Voltaire, no Scottish Enlightenment. In fact, what we need to do as British Muslims is to reclaim Enlightenment as our own and say that, hang on, just a minute. Enlightenment is not just something that happened in Europe, it's part of Islamic history as well, and it is part of the Muslim component of British Muslims. And it's, of course, part of the British component of British Muslims as well. So we need to, in a sense, reclaim the Enlightenment. And reclaim it in a very specific way. Because Enlightenment is based on what we call the adab literature, the literature of etiquette that developed in Islam from the Abbasid period up to 15th, 16th century. It is the great literature of universities that shaped universities, hospitals, thinking about reason and revelation. It's the literature of philosophy and storytelling. At the end of the day, it is the literature that defined liberal humanism. And it defined liberal humanism in Islam first, and then exactly the same literature and the same institutions ended up defining liberal humanism in Europe. So we need to reclaim the Enlightenment in a very specific Islamic liberal humanist tradition, the tradition of Ibn Rushd, the tradition of Ibn Tufayl. And we need to reclaim Enlightenment as our own. I think that's the kind of first thing that we need to do as British Muslims. And second thing is takes us back to my first point, that we don't really have a contemporary understanding of Islam. And here we need to bring the context back, that we need to understand Islam as British Muslims with British context. And British context has a particular history and particular etiquette as well that we need to appreciate. And I think that basically is that we cannot let me try and put this in a kind of as polite a way as possible, that we cannot undermine certain values that Britain has fought harder certain rights and freedoms that Britain has fought very hard to acquire, simply because we think that our belief system stands against them. There, I'm talking about freedom of expression, I'm talking about women's rights, I'm talking about human rights, and all the kind of, I'm talking about democracy, all the kind of things that we take for granted in Britain. I think as British Muslims, not just we are required to acknowledge them, but in a sense, I think we are required to actually appreciate and practice them as well, as part of our being Muslims. So in a sense, a mosque that asks women, to come from the back and secludes them in some kind of corner, I don't think is either very Islamic or very British. And I have a very fundamental problem with that. A demonstration, which is a legitimate form of expression, where you hold banners saying, chop, an apostate's head off or something, is I think neither very British, not all that Islamic. So in a sense, we do need to appreciate just there are certain values and concerns within Islam that we would like others to appreciate. There are certain values and concerns within British society that Muslims need to appreciate and embrace as well. And I don't think, in fact, that they negate Islam. On the contrary, I think they enhance Islam. So let me just conclude. I have a problem with Islam because I think we have no fresh understanding of Islam, that our understanding of Islam is essentially medieval. I have a problem with public space because I think public space relegates religion into inferior and irrational position, and I would like to turn that. And I have got so much problem with British Muslims. What I'm actually saying that we have, being British and being Muslims presents us with a couple of new challenges and appreciations. And one of the challenges that we need to rediscover the Enlightenment as our own and embrace it, and embrace its Islamic roots, because it has long and deep Islamic roots. And I think that one way we can gain a contemporary understanding of Islam is to appreciate there are certain hard-fought and won rights and freedoms in British society that we need to embrace. Thank you very much.
Excellent time, and thank you very much for that. I think we've got plenty of time for questions and discussion. I'm sure that you've raised such interesting issues with you, the questions that you asked, that there's bound to be lots of them. So if I could ask for you to ask, yes.
If I may. That's a very, very impressive talk, and thank you very much indeed. One thing which bothers me, which you mentioned, to be honest, I'm not a scholar, but all the books I've read as far as apostate is concerned, I know there's a choice, and I can't remember in my limited knowledge whether with Demia or Bin Baz or Maudud's interpretation, there is a thing that apostate should be chopped off, his head should be chopped off or killed. At the time of Prophet Muhammad, as far as I know, peace be upon him, there were people who became Muslims and then they transferred. And during those wars with the non-Muslims, people asked him, what about those people who have changed their religion from Muslim to back to their own religion? How shall we deal with them? And Prophet Muhammad's reply, if I'm not correct, and if there's any shaykh he can quote it, was that if he fights with you, against you, then you can kill him. Otherwise, you don't have to kill him. And that is what my understanding or interpretation of is apostate. Yes, it is. As you said, in the Abbasid time, it was a treason. And I think for treason, whether it is in this civilized democracies, is by death, So at that time they were operating as that. But at the time of Prophet and the interpretations I have heard, it has never said that apostate should be chopped off, you know. Yes, if he fights against you, then you can.
No, but Sharia,
In the Sharia, that's what I'm quoting,
yeah.
according to the Sharia. and the time of Prophet.
as far as I know, all schools of thought, the apostasy is punished by death. And in fact, if you go down to Pakistan, for example, that's the law.
No,
If you go down to Saudi Arabia, that is the law, and they say this is the Sharia. If you go down to Iran, they say this is our Sharia, and in a sense. But the point I'm making is that much of what we regard as Sharia, meaning divine law, is not, first of all, it's not divine. Very little of it is based on the Quran. Second, it's socially constructed in history. You know, Islamic law is jurist law. It's made by jurists. Now, these jurists may interpret a text that is divine, but it is their interpretation. It's not, their interpretation can never be divine, in a sense. So to say that all we have is that law and that law is permanent and eternal is a fundamental mistake, in my opinion. But what it actually meant is that our understanding of law, of Sharia, which is not just law, but also morality. For us, Sharia is almost everything. It's social relations, it's morality, it's law, is basically all 8th, 9th century, 10th century stuff. So our ethics and morality is 9th, 10th century. Yet morality has evolved, world has changed. Science and progress and thought has moved on. And therefore we really do need to go back to the text that we have. At the end of the day, all we have is a single text and the interpretation. We have nothing else. We can only have an interpretative relationship with the text. There's no other relationship you can have with the text. So we have to go back and rethink and interpret it. And I think the interpretation does require 2 or 3 contexts. It requires the context of revelation, the life of the Prophet Muhammad, but I think equally important, it requires the context of the time that you are interpreting in. And unless you bring that time there, you're not going to have a fresh understanding. And I think that's basically my main problem.
Thank you very much for such enlightening talk. As you rightly point out, all our interpretation comes from India, Pakistan, or Saudi Arabia. How do you think the younger Muslim British or generation can be made aware of the contemporary understanding of the real Islamic rules and teachings? How best you can inculcate these into the future generations or the present younger generations?
Well, I mean, to begin with, you do have to teach them certain basics of Islam in that sense. But I think also you need to allow them enough freedom to interpret the text the way they want to interpret it. We have a real kind of fear of interpretation. One of the most common fear is that you will get it wrong. If you read in the Quran and you're trying to interpret it, there's so many rules and regulations so that you can get it right. But there's always the fear that you could get it wrong. But the interesting thing is that the ulama stopped the printing, arrival of printing in Muslim world. Printing in the West appeared in the late 14th century, Caxton and all that. But in the Muslim world, the ulama stopped printing because they said copies of the Quran will be widely available and people will interpret them the way they want to interpret them, and they will get it wrong, and religion will go astray. So there is this great fear. Now this fear is the fear of being human. I mean, what makes me human is the fact that I make mistakes, that I get it wrong, and I get it wrong frequently. Right? If I always got things right, then clearly I'm not very human. And the first printing press appeared in Egypt. It's called Bulaq Press in 1850. So all that time, there was no printing because the ulamas were afraid that the copies of Quran and other religious texts were widely available, and people will not use the mullahs to interpret them. So we have this great fear, and I think we need to, the younger generation Muslims here, is to say, you have your own mind, you have your own understanding. Bring that understanding to understanding this text. Look at the life of the Prophet from your perspective. You don't have to follow the kind of traditional way of the Sira. The interesting thing about the traditional way of the Sira, the way the Sira is written, it's written in a very, very specific way. That you have, Arabia before Islam, birth of the Prophet, and so on and so forth. And you have 3 battles. And in fact, the bulk of any book of the Sira is devoted to the 2 or 3 battles, Badr and Uhud, and so on and so forth. But the Battle of Badr took half a day. Battle of Uhud took 3/4 of the afternoon. The Prophet was 23 years, right? And so less than a day of battles gets 25% of the Sira. If you look at the classical text of Sira, it gets even more. I mean, we have a whole literature of just Prophet's ghazwas, the battles of the Prophet, the whole literature. Well, for those people who were there, these battles have significance. For us, they don't have that much significance. What is of great significance for us is how the Prophet forgave when he returned to Mecca, or how he related to women in Medina, when he was there. I mean, all these things we know very little about, but we know a great deal about the battle. So in a sense, if we simply let the young minds, with their appreciation, to look at these texts themselves, and let them interpret, and not fear, I think that will be a major progress.
If I'm getting you right, what you're suggesting is, if I have a young, fresh mind and I've got an interest to look at some, let's say, medicine or maybe law,
This is a very.
it will be okay for me.
Let me stop you there. This is a very, very common example. People say, well, if you study law, you can't just go and look at the book of medicine and interpret it. If you do engineering, you have to go through all this training before you can become an engineer. So if you want to interpret the Quran, or if you want to look at life of the Prophet fresh, you should go through all the stuff that ulama go through. I can give you 2 or 3 answers. First of all, God is not going to ask you whether you studied medicine or not, or whether you studied, as I understand as a Muslim on the last day, whether you studied law or not. But He is going to ask you whether you behaved ethically or not, whether you behaved morally. And hang on. And He would say that I gave you a brain. Did you interpret the world around you and the text, sacred text, using your brain? And that to me is a much more fundamental thing. In a sense, it is my duty as a Muslim to learn as much as I can about the Quran and Sunnah, and to bring my own mind to try and understand it. That doesn't mean that the ulama become irrelevant. Of course, they have a role in society. But what I cannot do is to abrogate my responsibility to them and say, you interpret for me and you teach me everything. And I don't try to interpret myself or learn myself, in a sense. And I think as a Muslim, it is my duty to equip myself at least to the basics to actually learn as much as I can and try and interpret, understand, despite all the limitations that I may have. Try and appreciate and learn as much as I can of my own text and bring my own mind to actually bear. In the end of the day, since we are individually responsible for God, it is my understanding of the text that really matters to me. And if you like, my salvation. I don't like to use theological terminology, but my salvation.
Yes, please go ahead.
Listening to you, my mind has gone back in terms of interpretation. I totally agree with you that we have quite a few different versions of Islam depending on the country you go to and so on and so forth. And perhaps you will agree with me that much of that is the cultural inclusions which become part and parcel of Islam as well. But as far as the interpretation goes,
I feel there is a little bit of a danger in there. For the simple reason that if everybody is trying to interpret the Quran or Islam in their own way, we are going to leave the religion in terms of fragmentation. At the present moment, we've got so many different versions of that. We find it difficult to come to terms with that. We do not like each other because he believes that, she believes that, I believe different. We do not even like each other. To me, that is un-Islamic. But if we allow everybody, without any guidance, without any check, if you like, the interpretation of our faith and Quran, in my view, is going to lead to further fragmentation. And the more fragmentation of religion you find is going to destroy it. What is your view on that?
Yeah, first of all, there's so much fragmentation, as you already described. If we have a little bit more fragmentation, is it going to really make any difference?
No, but the idea is to stop that.
However, the thing is this. Suppose I read a verse of the Quran and I make an interpretation of it, and my interpretation is totally stupid. Yeah? The fact is, there are incredibly clever people around here. They will instantly see that my interpretation is totally stupid and not pay any attention to me. Yeah? Knowledge becomes knowledge by social process. That if I say something that makes sense, you agree that I've said something that makes sense. He agrees that I've said something that makes sense. She agrees that, right? There is a social consensus. And so on the basis of consensus, that the interpretation is accepted. And in fact, ijma or consensus is a part of how Islam develops, or it's a component of ijtihad, if you like. So that's the first thing. And second, the interpretation that I make is only binding on me, not on you. Just like a fatwa. If I'm a great scholar and I gave a fatwa, that fatwa is only binding on me and not on you. It's only you choose to accept it because you accept my scholarship or my authority, etc. But since I have no authority and no scholarship, and I'm just interpreting myself, it's something that's for my own understanding. So it doesn't threaten anybody. Now the interesting thing is that if you let me do that, and if I made a mistake, and I got it all wrong, right, and I see that what other people are saying, I may actually change my position and learn something from it, and maybe come to agree with you rather than with myself. However, if you said to me, this is the interpretation, and that's the only interpretation of this verse that is possible, and I'm teaching you from a great Olympian heights what it is, and if I was a young Muslim growing up in Britain, who, unlike young Muslims in, say, Egypt or Saudi Arabia, who were brought up to imitate, who actually had a mind and some critical faculties, who had done few GCSEs where he was taught to think, I will say, hang on, why am I being told what it is? I can read it myself. And anyway, what you're saying is wrong. Even if I don't think it's wrong, because you're trying to impose it on me, I will say it's wrong. So I think this idea of this great fear that we have, and it's a deeply authoritarian thing, and it's a very it's a fear of democracy at the end of the day. You see? I mean, look at all these guys who say they are great Muslims. One of the first things they do, and the first things that they speak against is democracy. And they will say it is inherently wrong, right? There's no place for democracy in Islam. Why? Because they fear, the individual, and the fact that individual may have an opinion and may have certain things to say. I mean, any Muslim country where Islam has been imposed, it's always imposed. It's never something that we Muslims say we would like. It's always imposed by a military dictator or somebody else. What is the first things they do? One of the first things they do? First things they do, no dissent of any kind. Right? Pure authoritarianism. Lock up all the women. Introduce flogging, chopping of hands and executions. I mean, if these are the three manifestations of Islam, there's actually no hope.
I totally disagree with this authoritarianism anyway.
Yeah, precisely. But somehow we need to move forward. We need to move forward. And I think the one way to move forward is not to fear the individual and not to fear the individual interpretation, in a sense, and accept the fact that if the individual is grossly wrong, nobody's going to accept that interpretation.
My problem has been for quite a while that if you go and speak to so-called men of religion, if you like, and if you ask them questions, I'm always in favor of asking questions. If you don't understand anything, by all means, ask the question so that you feel content. If you go to these people, men of religion and all the rest of it, and you ask questions, first thing we find, this is prevalent in most countries and most form of Islam, that you are discouraged. Don't do that. It is against God's will. You don't do this, you don't do that. Are you being a Muslim? You are not. It's not becoming a Muslim to ask questions like that.
No, I
you
think
may be very genuine in your understanding, trying to understand, but they shut you down.
yeah, absolutely. And we should refuse to be shut down. That's the point I'm making.
Yeah,
That we need to stand
but
up and speak.
I think
Yeah.
we should go away from that and open up. And if somebody asks you a question, to the best of the ability within the context of our faith, it should be explained to the individual. You know, what is the philosophy behind that?
Yeah.
Why we do what we do? This is another area, very few people or scholars, they explain people, whatever rituals or whatever we follow in our faith, they very rarely explain to you why we do it. You do it or else. That's not the way. I totally disagree with that.
Okay. I have a question up there on my right.
Just referring back to some of the points that you made in response to that brother's answers, one of the things that you said was when one interprets, that's not binding on anyone else. I personally feel that inherently your concepts are almost contradictory of the nature of Islam. I mean, for sure, Islam is a very individualistic religion, and that's why you made the point that interpretation is not binding on anyone else. But then you went on to say that we can have a consensual opinion, which yes, it is part of Islam. But if the root of your answer lies in the understanding that the interpretation is not binding on anyone else, the consensus cannot then make sense.
No, you can have both. I mean, in the sense that you can have an interpretation, you can have an individual interpretation, and I can have an individual interpretation, and a number of other people. But there could be a consensus among us that many of our interpretations are similar or moving in the same direction. So we can have a consensus. We can have individual differences and consensus at the same time.
There's one of the natures of Islam is that it's brought down for people, for humans, to understand their own limitations, and this is why people prefer to go to scholars and attain understanding. And I think the problem is that because Islam is not only a personal faith, it's a faith of the community, if you don't approach the right people for it, and the right scholars to understand that faith, the consensus of the different varying opinions, it can be very misguided. And the population should understand the faith from set people so that the final consensus is not something completely out of the bounds of religion.
Well, I'm saying something totally the opposite. I'm saying that your position is fundamentally wrong. Not just fundamentally wrong. It's the position that has brought us to the place we are in, where we in fact have no contemporary understanding of Islam. And it's at the end of the day, it's it privileges a certain elite and gives them certain authority that I don't think ought to be given to them. And it also abrogates your own responsibility. If you go down and ask in scholar for say guidance there is nothing wrong with that. But I also think that it is your duty to try and find out for yourself. Right? And then you can actually say, well, this is what I think, and what do you think? And he says, this is what I think. And then you can have, if you like, a discussion on that. But I don't think you can abrogate your own duty to actually try and find your... Now, you may not be well equipped. You may not have all the tools. I think to some extent you ought to develop some of the tools. And nowadays, of course, it's very easy. Let me give you a little... I'll just like to have a little... relate an anecdote. Once I found myself in the company of a great Egyptian scholar whose name I shall not mention, but this scholar was blind, and he lived in Cairo, in the citadel. And I happened to go into his house with a couple of other friends when in fact he was teaching. And this is the Egyptian house, with kind of big veranda in the middle and walls, and like typical Arab house. And it's nice and sunny, and the sun is just kind of about to set, and everybody's sitting in the veranda, this big huge carpet, and he's sitting in the middle on a little stool, and people sitting around him. And we walked in just at the time when somebody was asking a question. And somebody asked a question, I think it was something to do about contraception or something like that. And the scholar said to one of his students, so-and-so, can you stand up? So so-and-so stood up. He said, can you now go to the second floor of the house? So this man went like that, and we all followed him. Everybody sitting following him. And he got to the second floor. And he said, from the second floor, there's a shelf, third shelf. Can you walk to the third shelf? So you walk to the third shelf. Can you pull out fifth book, pull the book out, bring it down. We all watched, and the book came down. And he said, now open the book on page 138. Open the book on page 38. He says, read paragraph 2. And then he read paragraph 2, which was, so-and-so, Sheikh Safi says, blah, 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 and, contraception. And everybody was astonished, and they all said, wow, Sheikh, you're absolutely brilliant. He says, this is the answer to your question. So I raised my hand, I said, Sheikh, I don't really want to know what Sheikh Safi said about contraception in the 9th century. I want to know what you think. And he said, Astaghfirullah, how can I have an opinion in front of a great scholar like that? Have I not given you the riches that you find in the book? Now, that's the kind of setup we have, where in fact, what is going on, the scholars are just imitating, stuff, and have been imitating stuff throughout history. And taqlid, of course, is the dominant mode of thought. Somebody has to say, let's stop this nonsense and start thinking for ourselves.
Okay, I do agree that there's some scholars that would use that approach. However,
No, I'd say most scholars will use that approach.
just to make you aware, there are a lot of scholars that do only enter a region once they understand the culture of that region, and a lot of them will not issue certain jurisprudence unless they understand the culture and the environment. The other point is about abrogating one's duty. If you're taking that step towards a scholar, and first of all, you have to make that decision to seek the knowledge. Second is that you have to choose that scholar. And so all of these come after...
What do you mean you have to choose a scholar? What do you mean you have to... do you have to choose a scholar on a certain basis? I mean, do you choose a scholar... If you happen to be Shia, do you go to a Shia scholar? Or if you happen to be a, an Ahl Sunnah wal Jamaat, then you go to a scholar who's Ahl Sunnah wal Jamaat, or what?
There are a lot of scholars for different paths. For example, if you do more traditional school of thought, or if you do more secular school of thought.
Sorry, what I didn't understand.
There are different scholars for different Islamic teachings, and you have to make that decision with yourself, with your intellect, and with your religious research. And those are all parts of steps of seeking the final answer. We're not saying that we're relieving ourselves of all duty, we're not opening any books. What we're saying is that we are going to be experts in the field that we want to go into to attain the answers. Because otherwise there is more of a room of misinterpretation.
I agree, and I also think that misinterpretation is not necessarily a bad thing. I do not fear misinterpretation. I think it is the fear of the misinterpretation that is the problem. Because misinterpretation makes us human. And if you think that the scholars have not misinterpreted, then please explain to me why we are in the mess that we are in today. Why you have a country like Saudi Arabia where in fact you see every kind of obnoxious and inhuman thing going on in the name of Islam? Why do you have a country like Iran where you have every obnoxious thing going on now? Why do you have Taliban, Muslims who in fact come as close to the Third Reich as possible? There's a very serious problem if there no misunderstanding has been created.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah.
But if it's very short, because I prefer to stick with question rather than comment.
I think, Quran revelations have come in those instances, and there are, in some context, you need to know the shan and nuzul of that particular ayah. And it has been revealed for that particular situations on that particular time. And to your answers, we are trying to apply those situations now. I think that is creating the problem with the Taliban and whatever the people you have mentioned. Because the revelations that have come on those particular instances, and what you read in the newspapers and all those things, also about comments about the Jews or Christians, applies on that particular era.
Right. Yeah, I've got a question, yes, if you forgive me for cutting you off, yes.
First of all, I'm sorry I came late. From what I understood from one of your points, for a start, okay, there are some bad Muslim countries, but aren't there any countries and groups of people, let me say, which are also bad, who are not Muslims, and they don't necessarily interpret the Quran in their own way. So, okay, it's good to look at our own selves, but shouldn't we also see that it may not just be due to misinterpreting the Quran, which causes such groups to be. Also, a point you mentioned earlier about whether, okay, there's a scholar's opinion, so shouldn't we have our own opinion? But wouldn't that say, for example, there has to be a level at which we stop. If something is right, something is right. If something is wrong, it's wrong. Why should we have another opinion to that?
Interesting. If you look at other side, there are lots of societies which are very good, which are not Muslim.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Also, yeah. It's the same.
So you could be good without having the Quran.
Yes.
Yeah. Now that's very interesting point, because it suggests that if I look at the Muslim world and see lots of bad things and all Muslims have the Quran, then I can draw some very serious conclusions from that. So somehow we do need certain notions of Islam which nobody can say are misunderstood, which are humane and human, right? They promote certain things, that they are dynamic and progressive. The question is, why are we lacking those? And if they are to be found in certain parts of the Muslim world, why are these places so small and so insignificant that someone like me, who travels extensively around the Muslim world, has still difficulty in finding them? I think these are very fundamental questions, and then you ought to reflect on them. And you too. Yeah.
Oh, yes. Do I have a question at the back? No, okay, sorry. Oh, sorry, here, yes.
Thank you for the talk. I think I'll take your ask a question on management interpretation, since it seems to be such a hot topic. What exactly are we interpreting? Because there's a sense of interpretation in the sense that all of us probably read the Quran or read the Bible of Muhammad and take ethics and morals, and we do that of our own nature. This is something which is usually encouraged within, the forms of Islam which we're brought up in and taught in. But then, what would be the purpose of me picking up the Quran and interpreting legalistic rulings on marriage, on divorce, on
Yeah, I think if you do that, and you look at the context in which the verse was revealed, and you bring your own understanding to it, you will learn many new things. In particular, my own experience is that you develop a new kind of new understanding of what ethics and morality is all about in that sense. you discover not just that the Quran is so interconnected and integrated text, but also that the world is also rather interconnected. And if you really want to solve one particular problem of the world, you also have to pay attention to the other problems. I mean, there are so many the whole exercise you'll discover is so enriching and so transformative and so powerful that you really would have some new understanding. However, if you simply went to somebody else, who told you the answer, then it would not be very transformative for you in that sense. You can try and imbibe the answer in yourself, but it's not. You will not learn anything kind of. I mean, ethics, as I said, is very contextual. This is when you find yourself and you have to make choices and decisions. That's where ethics comes in. And by doing that, you're actually trying to develop very pragmatic ethics for yourself, as it were.
I mean, the thing will be, a lot of people, I'm sure, will profess that this is the relationship they already have with the Quran, and this is the
that's fine. I mean, if they have that, that's fine.
So I mean, in that sense,
yeah.
There's two follow-up questions I really have. I mean, in what sense does this interpretation need to take place on a further level? Surely that's the level of interpretation, reinterpretation, perhaps to use a different word, is at the level of extreme knowledge in certain topics, in certain nuanced areas.
Yeah.
Law.
You see, there are also different ways of reading the Quran. There's lots of people read the Quran because of barakah. Right? They have a relationship with the Quran and they read the Quran barakah, which to me is not quite the same thing as reading it for interpretation. In that sense, I mean, and then you're reading a text within a context. That's a different kind of reading. So there are different ways of there are different ways of reading the Quran. I mean, clearly, if you could go on the internet, or in fact, you don't have to go to the internet. If you have some channel like Al Jazeera or Arabia or somebody like that, or especially some Saudi channels, you could actually look at young Saudi scholars and some not so young, from Imam Abu Saud University or Makkah University, sitting there and giving fatwas, right? And with the Quran in their hand. And I dare you to watch that for an hour and a half and not be chilled. I mean, in some cases, every hair on your body will stand up when you listen to what these people are saying, right? Some of it is so obnoxious, some of it is so xenophobic, right? And what they say about the Jews or about, I mean, it is, or non-Muslim, it is so deeply xenophobic that forget about Islam, now I'm totally British, that every bit of my Britishness rejects that as obnoxious and nasty, that I don't want anything to do with it. Now that is being done in the name of Islam, right? That is being done with the Quran in the hand, and he's reading the verses of the Quran and giving you interpretation, right? Now that I find, as a Muslim, I find that very, very problematic. And if you want to go to these ulamas and get all this stuff, that's your problem.
Sorry, I got another question in the middle of the question, so I do apologize.
Yeah.
But the main one that I would ask is the idea of everyone having an interpretation of, let's take for example, the Quran. Surely the biggest block to that is the fact that if anyone picks up an English translation, it's an interpretation of an interpretation. In the sense
right. Yeah. We live in an imperfect world.
Sure.
We live in a world where, in fact, only 300 million people can said to be Arabs. That something like 700 million Muslims don't speak Arabic at all. And in fact, of the 300 million who do speak Arabic, their understanding of the Quran is just as bad as those who don't speak Arabic. In some cases, may even be worse. So, alhamdulillah, welcome to the real world, where in fact I mean, there's so many different, now, I mean, there are two things. Yes, a translation is not the Quran, but there's some very good translations out there now. I mean, in the last 10 years, I've seen some very good translations. If you just sit down with 2 or 3 of them, I mean, it's a really mind-opening exercise.
Doesn't that really then lead on to the fact that if we do need an understanding of the Arabic to get to a real core understanding of the Quran, away from any other interpretations that an author or translator might have had, that you do need a level of scholarship before interpreting the Quran? Isn't that just natural? You
need certain tools. I would say you need to understand the context. I think, but in a sense, you see, for example, the scholar I was describing, who was going on, to get that text and read that. I mean, basically a great deal of content of classical Muslim scholarship was based in memory. And what you have here, the anecdote I described, is a memory bank. What we really have is a floppy disk. You know, he's doing exactly the same thing as the computer does to a floppy disk in this sense, old-fashioned or hard disk. The classical, kind of qualifications you needed to become a person who can do ijtihad or somebody who can interpret, were all memory based. You had to know 200 hadiths by heart. You had to know the fiqh of the book, 4 books of fiqh by heart. You had to know. I mean, it was all by heart, all memory stuff. Nowadays, you don't need that. I mean, you can get the alim, this little CD which gives you the thing. I mean, with certain things like alim, you go to look at a particular verse, it gives you 6 or 8 different translations. Now, not all of these translations could be bad. Not all of them could be totally wrong. There must be some truth in, and if you look at them, you can discover some, you can learn a great deal. I mean, I would say that as individual Muslims, we both collectively as well, but as individual Muslims, we do need an interpretative relationship with the text that we think is sacred and eternal. If I think a text is sacred and eternal, then the only relationship I can have with that text is the interpretative one, is to go and read and interpret. Go and read and interpret. That is the only relationship possible. There is no other relationship possible. And if I relegate that to somebody else, you interpret for me, then I think I've cut myself. And that's to me, I think is one of the major tragedies of contemporary Islam, that we do not have a relationship with our text. And those who do have a relationship with the text, that their understanding of the text is 8th or 9th century understanding.
Right. I think that I'll have to stop questions from the floor for now. However, I'm going to misuse my chair's privilege by just making a comment and then we'll close. And I think this evening has been a very, very good example of what I think I've understood for you to be advocating, which I would call critical engagement in the public space, whatever its limitations. And I think I just want to add that you mentioned earlier during your talk about British society having fought very hard and long for freedoms such as freedom of expression and action in society, particularly in the public sphere. And I just want to add an addendum to that really has been a long-hand battle of experience born out of religious wars lasting hundreds of years. So I just want to finish there. And I'd like to thank the speaker again, and I'm sure you will.